Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running.
It's hard to believe that we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great conversations over the years about so many great movies. All that said, producing this show week after week requires a ton of work behind the scenes.
Becoming a Next Reel member gives you access to all sorts of additional and exclusive content. Plus, you're helping us keep the lights on. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership, where you can learn more about becoming a member, which costs a measly $5 a month, practically the same as one fancy coffee drink. And you get so much more.
Every month, we record a bonus episode exclusively for members. Those episodes cover movies from whatever series we're covering at the moment, or add to previous series.
Some movies we've covered that only members get to hear us discuss include The Blues Brothers,
The Russia House,
Naked Lunch,
Independence Day,
The Hot Rock,
and Relic, the better one. Plus, members get to vote on what we're going to discuss for those episodes.
We also record additional pre- and post-show content in regular episodes that only members get to hear.
Like conversations about similarly themed movies.
And answering listener questions from our live member chat.
Speaking of our live member chat, we record almost all of our episodes in Discord, where members can chat right along with us live.
Members get access to other members-only channels in our Discord community as well. On top of all that, members get all episodes a full week earlier than everyone else in a private Next Reel feed just for them that includes all the shows in the Next Reel family. The Next Reel, the Film Board,
movies we like, Sitting in the Dark, and more new projects on the way.
To top it all off, members don't have to listen to ads. We've already eliminated those annoying, dynamically inserted ads that, let's face it, we all hated.
We are listening to you.
We love podcasting for a living, and those ads help to pay the bills. Now, we're counting on you, dear listener.
We promise. We aren't going back to those terrible, dynamically inserted ads that don't relate to us at all. All we ask is that you consider supporting the Next Reel family of podcasts with a membership.
Again, it's $5 per month or $55 per year. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership.
thenextreel.com/membership. Get your access to early, ad-free episodes with bonus content, member bonus episodes, and access to member channels and live streams in Discord by signing up today.
Welcome to the Next Reel's Movies We Like, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. I'm Andy Nelson. That over there is Pete Wright.
Hi, I'm Pete Wright.
On today's episode, we have invited Ross Riege to talk about Terrence Malick's 1998 film, The Thin Red Line, a movie he likes. Ross, Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Looking forward to chatting about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a wonderful pick, and I'm thrilled to get a chance to add some Terrence Malick to our lineup. We haven't, surprisingly, after all these years of podcasting, we have not talked about any Malick films, which is
it's not surprising. It's not surprising because I have so little patience for a lot of Terrence Malick, and I can't believe we haven't talked about this one.
Yeah.
There's so much Terrence Malick I can't watch, but this one deserves to be talked about.
Yeah.
Well, it's not surprising.
I wasn't sure. I figured it was a long shot that it might have already been in the catalog. So glad to break the ice with it.
Yeah,
for sure. Before we really start digging into that, let's talk a little about you and the work that you do. You've been in the world of cinematography for quite some time, and I think your breakout film was Kings of Summer. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it was kind of I did some smaller indie films as we all do, kind of coming up, and not that Kings of Summer was big, but for me at the time, that was the first kind of feature project that I did where I was kind of looking at it like, oh, if I screw this up, it's over. Like this is the chance. It's you either go up or you go down. So that was kind of the first big undertaking. So there's a lot of firsts with that movie for me.
Oh, Kings! It's a beautifully shot film. Like it is. I should say, maybe luckily, it's a film you can be proud of, right?
Yeah.
That's got to feel good. Right?
Yeah. Thank you. And of course, that's ironically, or not ironically, tied into the Malick of it all, because obviously there's some reference in there for us. So.
Well, I was going to say, because I mean, in the reviews of the film, Hollywood Reporter compared the quality of the filmmaking to that of Terrence Malick, which I think is funny and fitting, as you said, that we're going to be talking about it. So
yeah, we'll take that compliment any day.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no kidding. So talk a little bit about your career. Like, how did you get into cinematography? Kind of the journey that you've had to get to where you are today.
I didn't grow up as a big film nerd. And, I spent most of my time in middle school, high school watching dumb comedies. I grew up on like Monty Python and Mel Brooks and then into, Tommy Boy, Dumb and Dumber and Happy Gilmore and all that. And then, but I was super interested in stop motion animation, claymation, Lego animation. And then in high school, a friend of mine and I, we were in a class that allowed us, instead of doing term papers, we could do a painting or do a video and so this is before YouTube time. So we're like, great. We pulled out our parents' handy cams and we started making videos instead of having to write papers, which was great. And part of the way we made it more interesting was we started building puppets and doing a lot of puppet based, recreations of the Black Death and stuff like that. And from there, both of us were kind of like, well, maybe we should study puppetry or something when we move, everybody's taking these tests and, maybe I'll be an architect. Maybe I'll get into finance. And he and I we sat our parents down. We were both like, we want to go to the University of Connecticut and get a bachelor's degree in puppetry, which they, to this day, I believe they still have. And our parents were like, well, so
let me get this straight, Ross. Is the puppet an accountant or an attorney at any point? Can we, refine that?
That would have been a good adjustment where it's like, well, what if the character becomes that? Does that make it more legitimate?
Right.
But yeah, so both of us kind of pivoted into film, television, and try to learn more about those disciplines, which we clearly had a lot to learn as we both continued discovering. So I managed to get into film school at NYU and then realized I wasn't a director, was a terrible writer, enjoyed photography. And so kind of from there, I just kind of fell into it. There's a lot of people shooting material in film school and needing people to shoot it. So
I have to know what is the lesson that told you were not all those other things?
Man. Well, the directing, I think right off the bat, I realized how much I didn't know from a technical standpoint. And then, kind of like I was saying before, when I first got to film school, I realized people were speaking languages way above and beyond anything that I understood. The people that were watching French New Wave stuff when they were 14 years old. And I was like, I'd never been exposed to that. So I just felt very out of my element there. But the one thing that I did kind of gravitate towards was all the still photo electives that I was taking. So I was in the darkroom all the time, and I was like coming back, and anytime we talked about photography or cinematography, that was my wheelhouse. And so I just I took that fork in the road, and everything was kind of behind me at that point. I think for me, it gave me I consider that early enough for me that it gave me an opportunity to learn about editing, directing, all those other things that you still have to do in film school, to learn about that through the mindset of a cinematographer. What is my role in relation to supporting that, instead of trying to do that independently and then jump back. So to me, that it kind of worked out great, even though if I went back into another life and planned it, it would have gone differently. But
Yeah, right.
As always, you were learning on film, it sounds like, and was there much of a transition for you in the idea of capturing images as you shifted over to kind of digital cinematography?
No, I think, like, for most people, it was, in a lot of ways, it made things easier, to be able to see exactly what you're making, to a certain degree, with technology. I mean, I've had that conversation many times with people. If we had DSLRs when I was in film school, how much different that would have made the experience for all of us, for better or for worse. I mean, there was still, I think, the Canon XL2 was the big video camera at the time, which looked really cool from the outside. But nothing beats when you have the ability to just cut on the spot and shoot as much as you want. It would have changed for me personally a lot of the ways I would approach it. Like learning how much time it takes to do one splice on a Steenbeck. You realize how important 2 frames can be in the cut and the pace of a shot of an edit. So,
Right, yeah.
so I think a lot of, like, if we had access to all that stuff, I probably would have made a lot more stuff in film school and early on after. But it probably wouldn't have been any better. It probably would have been worse, to be honest.
I know there are DPs who look at, every project's its own project, or every project's a project. You get behind the camera, you shoot what's on the script, you make it, as much of your own as you can. But I'm looking at your catalog, and it's kind of got some extraordinary swings, right? Like we talk about Kings of Summer to, The Catch, Raised by Wolves. You've got some Grey's Anatomy in there, but then we get into Walking Dead, World Beyond, like 11 episodes there. Weird, the Al Yankovic story, and of course your current, in current release, The After Party. All of these have such a distinct cinematic flavor. How do you approach these tonally? Like, are you thinking about that when you put your eye up to the camera?
Well, I mean, definitely everything's subjective with what you're working on, and I think for me, part of it, starts with the projects you choose. So, I mean, After Party is kind of an interesting example as an overarching, as you list everything off, because that in and of itself, what makes it so exciting to jump into in the beginning is that I see it as this opportunity to try so many different things. And I mean, I think a lot of people probably look at it this way, but for me, I feel like one of the biggest parts of our backbone as a filmmaker in any discipline is that you never stop learning things. It's wild to think that if anybody would call me experienced, that I've been around for a while, because I still feel so young. I work, I bring my keys on. I'm constantly, one of the first things I will tell a gaffer, a key grip, when I work with them is like, just, I'll tell you what I like, what kind of my tendencies are, what tools I like to have in the kit, but I want to try new stuff. I want you to like, when we're doing a day exterior with an overhead, what do you typically use? And let's look at it, and I find that if I'm not, at some point, if I stop trying to find new stuff, then I should start looking to do something different, I suppose.
What do you think your reputation is with your keys? What would they say about you working with you?
What I would think and hope that they would say, I think is true, is that I'm pretty patient and warm with people. I'm very, like, my people are very important, supportive, collaborative, and I've also worked with a handful of directors that are not always the easiest, and not really in a bad way. But I think that's part of my makeup, is to try to meet people where they're at. And Malick is another interesting example. I know we'll get into, but and I've never met him or seen him work, but you get the sense that people can take them one way or the other. They can be very polarizing, and I find that you can take the biggest personalities, and as long as you can get to know them and understand what makes them tick and what their motivations are, it actually can be a wonderful experience, very rewarding. So I guess that goes hand in hand with, choosing all sorts of different tones and styles to work with, because it stretches you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to constantly exploring and thinking of different ways to tell stories and using the tools that you have, because I mean the tools are constantly evolving. That is certainly the case. Let's now start shifting our attention over to Terrence Malick's film, The Thin Red Line.
In this world, a man himself is nothing, and there ain't no world but this one.
I've seen another world. Sometimes I think it was just my imagination.
If I go first, I'll wait for you there, on the other side of the dark waters. Why should I be afraid to die? I belong to you.
We're going straight up that hill there. How many men do you think it's worth? How many lives?
There's nowhere we can hide, except in each other.
I killed a man. Worst thing you can do. Nobody can touch me for it.
Make no difference who you are. No matter how much training you got, how tough a guy you might be, you're in the wrong spot at the wrong time, you're gonna get it.
I want you to attack right now, with every man at your disposal.
I've lived with these men, sir, for 2.5 years, and I will not order them all to their deaths.
You know, a lot of people say it's the best contemporary war film that has been made, arguably. And Terrence Malick is certainly a director who gets some, a lot of praise and also a lot of people scratching their heads with the stuff that he does. And I think I know
Are you just trolling me right now? Like, I know you're talking about me. You don't have to hide it.
Well, I mean, before we start talking about the visuals, because I definitely want to talk about the visuals with you as a cinematographer, but I would love to start this conversation with Terrence Malick's use of voiceover, which has been such an ongoing element of his films right from the beginning that he's kind of introduced. And it's such a fascinating thing to hit this film, which, it was based on a book. It's previously been made that I think it's probably, I haven't seen it, but my guess is it's probably a lot more straightforward of an adaptation of the story. And here we are coming to this one, which definitely tells the story, but also has this very pensive look at each of the characters and kind of their internal thoughts and everything as they're going through this war. So in the scope of this type of storytelling, I mean, what does it bring to the table for you, Ross?
I think it goes hand in hand right away with the kind of meditative quality of his work. I mean, I think if you're watching any of his films, your first Malick experience, let's call it, as soon as you go right into the voiceover and it's not just like an introduction thing, I think it's immediately telling you, look, we're going to be in our actors' heads, and we're going to ideally be in your head. And it's supposed to be very thought-provoking and inner dialogue, inner monologue. So to me, I think, from film to film, it's obviously used differently depending on what the ensemble or lack thereof is. But, like in Thin Red Line, it makes sense the way it starts. But then suddenly you'll just have, for me, even rewatching it, there are a few places where it's like, oh, okay, we're back in voiceover land, but it's with this character now. And so even though it might be jarring at times, it's the same way that I think he uses his edit, like in this movie, where you get into the battle scenes and sometimes it feels really choppy and the pace might feel off, but it's very intentional. So I think to a certain degree, I also find that when he steps into those voiceovers, sometimes it wakes you up a little bit. I've had the experience of kind of getting lulled in and out of sequences when I watch his stuff. And sometimes that voiceover kind of wakes you up a little bit, but it's also not unlike the human experience, I feel like. So I can relate to it.
Pete, you're coming into this.
I'm a
like
noted antagonist of voiceover.
Well, not voiceover, but I mean, just Terrence Malick in general. You're like, there's some Terrence Malick that's hard to take, but I mean, with this particular film with the voiceover, I mean, how does it work for you?
No, it does. I think what Ross said is right on for me too, because it's the meditation of the experience, and it's the interpersonal sort of the head voice of each of these characters as they talk to me. And for some reason, I don't find myself driven to a mad rage over voiceover, because this isn't necessarily about the filmmaker not trusting me to get it. The voiceover is about their experience, like adding to their lived experience in this war zone. And the thing that bugs me quite specifically about most voiceovers is it's there because the filmmaker doesn't trust me in the audience to understand what they're doing.
Yeah, it becomes expositional.
Yeah, maybe they needed it because they didn't trust themselves, right? I don't know. But this works for me, and I think it's the Malickness of it, because let me tell you, he suffers no fools in his movies writ large. In this movie quite specifically, like, he has a lot of trust in the audience that you're going to ride along with the just massive set of characters and faces and experiences, and I still find that the voiceover does work. It doesn't get in the way.
Even the structure, because I mean, this story starts with, we've got Jim Caviezel AWOL, and he's living in this little village, and then they see a boat, and the boat is approaching, and then suddenly we cut, and now he is in the brig, and Sean Penn is talking to him. Other filmmakers would have had that whole capture of these two soldiers who were AWOL, and we'd kind of have that whole part of the story. And this one, he's trusting us to understand, we see them, they see the boat, now they're on the boat. Like, we get all of those pieces. We don't need, and maybe it was there in the 5-hour cut originally, but like, that's something that I feel that Malick understands, that we understand storytelling, and we kind of can put those pieces together without having to have every piece explained the whole way.
Yeah. What I'd be curious too is to what extent he's considering it as I believe the audience is going to be smart enough, and I don't need to connect the dots for them. Versus is it just utter confidence where he's like, this is the story I'm telling.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it, follow it or don't follow it. And as we know, there are plenty of places in plenty of his movies where people are just like, I don't get this at all. And I don't, frankly, from what I've read about him and what I see in his films, I'm kind of like, I don't think he cares. It's kind of like, you get me or you don't,
Yeah.
Well, he certainly seems to have drifted farther along that path.
Sure.
As his career has gone. That's for sure.
And I'll be honest, I haven't watched a lot of his recent stuff. And I almost wonder if that's for the better. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I haven't either. I think the New World, I think, might be the last one of his I've seen, which is, quite a while. That was the one right after this, and then
yeah.
No, I take it back. I saw
Tree of Life.
The Tree of Life. Yeah.
That's really I think you're that helps me provide a framework around their sort of ideology. Like, they just don't. It is quite possible that they just don't care what my experience is. This is the story they're going to tell. This is Terrence Malick. This is Darren Aronofsky. This is like, what's his name? It would be Penguins. What is his name off the top of my head?
Herzog?
I can't remember. Werner Herzog. Like, they just don't. This is the ultimate confidence, because gave you such a great cue. Stop it. That they have such great confidence that this is the story that needs to be told, and they're the ones who are they're capable of telling it. And come hell or high water, that's the story we're going to see.
Yeah, I'd rather have that than get banged over the head with,
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's the art in filmmaking, and it's I suppose in the world of filmmaking, there's always that challenging line of art and commerce, because obviously you need to make a lot of money to pay off the amount of money it costs to make a movie. And with a filmmaker like Terrence Malick, who, this, from reading about this, he kept it on budget and didn't go over, even though, they were shooting for like 100 days. It was definitely a lengthy production. And, it was one of those things where I think that it ended up making money, and he was able to succeed, but he's able to keep his kind of position as an artist and do the stuff that he wants. And he doesn't like the preview screenings. He's a very private person anyway. And so I think by maintaining the artistic focus of the story and the storytelling style that he's employed, I think he's been able to kind of keep that going. And I think that's hard though in this industry,
especially today.
Yeah. I mean, somehow, with Badlands and Days of Heaven, he earned something because what I've read about getting into Thin Red Line, there was kind of this, everybody was so excited he was coming back to directing. And I think it seems like there was this kind of willingness for a lot of people to give him more room than even in the late 90s, they were giving most directors, I think. And as far as I'd be curious how he worked his diplomacy during the process when you have producers over your shoulders being like, well, what are we doing today? How come we're not shooting the scene that was on the schedule? And I don't even know if his schedule works that way. So there's a amount of like as DPs, the story, between film and digital is like as soon as we changed from film to digital, one of the things that started to go away was that kind of magician implicit trust that you have in a DP that you're like, well, I don't know exactly what it's going to turn out like. I'm seeing a tap, a black and white tap or whatever. But I trust the person that I hired to do the project. And so now we've gotten into this, 4K monitors with the full gamut and everybody's looking at you're on a commercial and people are like, well, what is that? What is that little, it's slightly that red feels a little yellow. And you're like, well, let's not get too buried in that. So he to me he's been able to maintain that kind of trust, or at least kind of the protective barrier to be able to work the way he likes to work, which is great.
Yeah. And, I suppose there's a little bit of that element of like the filmmakers of old, like John Huston, who is like, I'm going to go shoot on location because I know the producers aren't going to want to come follow me there. And, and here Malick is doing this thing, filming in the rainforest in Australia. And I imagine that the producers were, I don't know. I don't know any of the stories, but, there is that line that they're probably like, I'm sure he's got it. Just like that going.
I mean, when you deliver, people argue.
Absolutely.
I gotta. Okay, it's a Rube question. It's a practical question. It's the practicalities of shooting a movie like this, because the thing that strikes me so deeply about this movie as I'm watching it last night was, first of all, they're shooting super close to people crawling through grass in waving fields of grass on a hillside moving up to this embankment, right? They were there shooting for 6 months. Or as you said, 100 days or whatever. The Battle of Guadalcanal was 6 months. What? How far you shoot that? Like, I saw not a single sign of trampled grass, trampled under camera rails. Like, what are you thinking as you watch this movie? Do you ever find yourself looking at it and saying, I wonder how they did that?
100%. I do remember reading the American Cinematographer article about it. And I know one thing they did, which now I can't not think about when watching it, is they used an Aquila, a super long crane called the Aquila. And they would do these, basically use it as just a dolly that wouldn't touch anything. And it would still have an arc, but that enabled them to get past that inevitable thing. I mean, I've been on sets in small fields, and no matter how many disclaimers you give a crew, stuff gets trampled like immediately.
Yeah.
So, I think,
this stuff is just pristine for the first half of the movie. It is pristine.
Yeah. And it's such an important element too, that the blowing of that tall grass is such a huge lyrical piece of the puzzle. So, but scouting, of course, and I know they still use a lot of Steadicam, a lot of handheld stuff. But yeah, you any of those moments where you're hunkered down in the grass with a soldier, and they're like, there's this one moment where one of the guys is like touching a leaf, and the leaf curls up, and it's interesting to have that perspective that was how the war was fought there. They were just buried in the dirt. But filming any of those moments, you're carving out. It's like, where are the apple boxes go, and the Fernie pads, and but an assistant needs to be next to you. So I'm sure part of that is also just the way Malick works is probably a lot more low profile, would be my guess. But in terms of equipment, I know that like that crane, I've never worked with it, but to me was probably the most critical creative solution that they came up with, which was great.
Yeah, really
fascinating.
Well, let's take a step back a little bit. We kind of jumped in with some specifics, but what is the reason? What is it that you love so much about this film, and the reason that you picked it to talk about today?
Well, I obviously my roots and reference with Kings of Summer was a Malick thing, and the first movie I was really involved in when I moved out to LA, and this was actually before I even had a place in Los Angeles, was a friend of mine who straight out of film school was his first movie that was called Redland. My friend that I was telling you guys about with the puppetry and everything, he was a classmate of his. And so my friend was tasked with doing all the second unit. We were shooting up in by Arcata in Humboldt, and period piece. And that reference was 100% Malick, Badlands, Days of Heaven. And I hadn't seen the movies at the time. And so that was like accompanying my first trip out to California to work on a project, shooting 35 anamorphic. I was watching all this Malick stuff and I was like, what is this? And my job being go shoot second unit. And it was a very open-ended, like shooting elk grazing in the morning. So my friend and I would wake up at 4 and we would shoot for the first 3 hours of the day. We'd go nap in the middle of the day, unless we needed to come join the main unit. And then we would go shoot at sunset. It was kind of a dream job. Here's a couple thousand feet of film, go drive around and discover stuff. And, a handful of stuff we shot is in the movie. And then the rest of it is just this fantastic memory. And so I think I just in my filmmaking DNA, I've just like always responded to that kind of dream idea of going out into nature and just shooting the most beautiful stuff you can. And ironically, in Kings of Summer, as much as I got to do some of that, we hired a friend who's an operator / DP at the time, who's since blown up and he's in his own DP world, Mike Berlucci. And he was like, we would send him out and just be like, oh, go shoot. We're shooting single camera right now. Go shoot nature stuff. And there's a lot of nature stuff without actors in it in Kings of Summer that he just was out like running, gunning on his own, which was great.
That's fantastic.
So you got to steal that dream from me.
just always fail at the job you don't want, man.
Yeah.
John Toll is the cinematographer on this particular film. And let's talk a little bit about the cinematography and especially the blending of the natural world and war. And I think that's something that definitely is another attraction that Malick clearly has in the projects that he's made. But just the cinematography, just watching some of the shots of like the sunlight kind of dapple coming down through the leaves with the camera like pointed straight up, or just all the nature. Like there's so many animals, like the creatures, the flora and fauna that he's kind of got, and people's interactions with them. I mean, just talking about what you were just saying about kind of this going out and capturing this sort of footage. I mean, how does it work for you in this film and the way that Malick's using it?
To me, it's quintessential Malick. I think it's great. I mean, I obviously there's also kind of that elephant in the room that this came out right. What is it, after Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah, right after.
And which I'm a huge fan of that film as well. But they're very different takes on a very similar subject, and I enjoy them both in different ways. In this sense, I think it helps push the divide between the intimate experience you're having with the soldiers themselves and the world that they're in. There's this kind of like, it's such a beautiful environment. I think the statement about it's such a beautiful world. And you have the villagers too, which are kind of this peaceful tribe that you're introduced to. And then right next to it is you're jarred out of it by this kind of brutality and the kind of like animal side of man, the dark animal side of man in war. And so that's the way I read into it. And so I think if you're going to make a kind of a contemplative story where you're just with the soldiers and having their experience, I think you need to have that breadth of what the environment is like without having to include them all the time. So to me, it's what I would expect and what I enjoy about his films. But I think part of the reason why I have a soft spot for it is because I also understand how challenging it can be to be able to get that stuff practically in production. I've done jobs where it's been a priority, and I've done other jobs where it's like, it would be great to get it if we could. And unless it's like you really have a plan, it is so hard to prioritize those spontaneous, those serendipitous moments where the sun is hitting just right. And you're I read a story. I was reading some articles this last weekend, and I read a story. An actor was saying something about, we were prepping this big sequence, and they have airplanes. They're queuing the airplanes to take off, and we're all dirty. We're all crouched down and stuff. And then right before we started, he said action. He looked over and he told John Toll. He said, "Oh, look, there's a red-tailed eagle." And then they flipped the camera over and started shooting this eagle flying around while there's airplanes resetting. And he said that's Malick.
Yeah.
And so, but that's to me is a great example of if you're not a slave to if nature offers you something in the moment.
Yeah.
And you're not willing to kind of set everything aside. And I can't even imagine the balls to just be you know what, hold on, everybody else pause for a second.
Yeah.
But that's the way you get that stuff. And so when I see that in a film, and I know his process is so unique that way, I can really appreciate that more, because I know that a lot of things have to get pushed out of the way. That big footprint of a big movie has to get paused for something that is so simple and so and so verite.
That's one of the things that I think is so special about this film in particular. It's that there's only so much Nick Nolte screaming that the movie can handle before it buckles if you don't have the greenery, if you don't realize, and I think that's my impression of this movie, that Malick recognizes the story is the space between Nick Nolte screaming at me and the beauty of this world that it's butting up against. And that's the thing that makes this movie special. At 3 hours, at 5 hours, that's where the movie lives.
Yeah. 100%.
To that point, I think that I can't remember if it's Nolte or it might be Nolte, which of the characters has the line about how it's really just this fight for property. And that's really kind of what this is. And to a certain extent, that's so much of what war is anyway, of we want to take this piece of land. Now they're going to try to take it back, and the whole back and forth. But in the context of saying, it's a fight to get this piece of property, showing so much of that, and not just in the sense of well, we want to see the land because that's what they're fighting over, but really it's just it's putting it into a different context. And it's this recognition that there's so much more to it than just this piece of property, there's this beauty to it, this kind of connection that to a certain extent, war almost requires you to remove yourself from that connection. And I mean, it's the humanity anyway. You're removing yourself from the fact that you're just killing these people. It's horrifying what you have to do in the context of war, but that's what it is. And the war machine shuts all of that off, and it's we've got to get this property, and that's their focus and that's their drive. And it's just you lose all of that. And so I don't know how this film could exist without all of these pieces, because so much of it is that recognition of these people to a certain extent kind of losing their souls over the course of the story here.
Yeah.
The sort of, I don't even know how many pieces I have in this movie that are broken up in my head, but there is another piece, and it's the performative piece. It's that we have these characters who are, to the same extent that we have the walk and talk with Nick Nolte saying, how many of your men are you willing to lose for this cause, right? And really what he's saying is, how many of your men are you willing to lose for my promotion, right? That's really what we're talking about. And so you have these characters like Jim Caviezel, and you have Adrian Brody, and you have John Cusack, and to me, their faces on camera aren't to do anything more than, by doing nothing and playing straight, ridicule the George Clooney's and the Nick Nolte's and their superiors, who are completely fungible resources. And I think that's another layer of sort of conflict that Malick is able to sort of conjure up almost effortlessly, that I think makes it really special. And then you have Sean Penn, who's just sort of in between the two. He's just sort of that wizened Sean Penn, who again shows up in the Ben Stiller movie On the Hill shooting cats. It's that same guy. And so I'm curious, from your perspective behind the camera, as you're looking at great performances, how aware are you that you're capturing great performances?
I would say that the most straightforward, easiest ones for me have been when I've shot great comedians, great improv stuff. A lot of that's, we did a handful of that stuff in Kings of Summer, but prior to that, just doing weird shorts and stuff. when you're going off script, because obviously you know what's happening with the script, and I think in comedy, when you start going off script or when people are starting to riff and you see it take a new life, to me, that's one of those things that's very, very quickly is like, you're hoping all this stuff can stay in the cut at that point, when you're trying to compose yourself laughing behind the camera because things so unexpected are coming out. But I think in terms of dramatic stuff, I think I've gotten to moments a few times where we're shooting something, and often it's a director who you see a rhythm happening, you see somebody building to something, and there's a kind of like a hush. In my experience, there's kind of a hush over the room, and everything becomes very kind of tender, and everybody's supporting that moment, and the director comes in, gives a quick note, or just resets it. And at that moment, it's like it kind of feels like the heat is on, and suddenly I feel like I'm in a stadium with 1,000 people looking at me, being like, "Don't like," I'm like, "Oh, what if I accidentally bump the camera in the middle of this?" I feel like I will ruin, like the State of the Union address or something. So I think there are just some kind of instinctual moments where you're suddenly like, I think I'm in the presence of something really special right now, and that's not to say, obviously, everything we do is a wonderful opportunity. We're always working around these incredibly talented people, but yeah, there are some times where you're like, even I don't know how a performer would feel, but there's got to be points where they're like, wow, I'm really feeling this right now, and when you're around that, it's that's nice, because I think everybody feels it, in a different way.
That's got to be a really interesting perspective on a Malick film. Like, I can't imagine. Obviously, all of the voiceover stuff, I shouldn't say obviously, but I'm assuming that all of that stuff he records after production. I mean, it's possible he records some of it beforehand, but there's different methods. But just the idea of filming just the story. I mean, everybody's here just kind of capturing the essence of the story. With somebody who really probably might be the only person who really has the full vision in his head as far as like what he's trying to do. And as you said, like, hey, let's go film that hawk over there, and just kind of capturing all of those moments. And for the actors, it's interesting. I was reading about, it was Woody Harrelson and I think it was John Savage, two actors who like finished filming and stayed on set for another month just to watch Malick work, because they were so fascinated with the way he directs. And the idea of like your story of like being like you're in a production and you're filming and you feel that sense like you're capturing something. But in a Malick film, I imagine that's such a difficult, tangible thing to actually get to, because you're like, it's so esoteric in so many ways, and so much of it comes connected with all the pieces, kind of the way that he puts it together. But still, like, there are actors, like, people are still able to tell, like, there's still something special being captured here.
Yeah, I would think that, knowing the kind of small amount that I understand about the process and watching his stuff, you would think that their actors would be kind of like, is that what you wanted? Like, I'm not really sure.
Right.
Where does this fit into the grand scheme? But you've got to believe that. And I'm sure there's some actors that find it really difficult to work with him. And some of them probably think, he's the most genius person they've ever worked with. And they're probably both right in their own ways. But I would have to assume that he has a way of communicating, even if he can't say exactly how it's going to fit. He has a way of communicating what the role is and what he's looking for out of it. And there probably is an incredible amount of satisfaction and feeling of achievement by the time you get to that point, for an actor to get his approval, to like get through the scene, and for him to say, we nailed it. That's great. That was beautiful, or whatever. They're probably like, oh my gosh, he's going to do something great. Again, that like, implicit trust that he's had to have earned with them. But it also sounds like, generally speaking, coming into Thin Red Line, I think he probably had a lot of actors that were kind of like, I'll do whatever he tells me. I trust him.
You can kind of see that in the cast that he built for this thing. It's bonkers.
Yeah. Yeah. Even to see, like, Clooney has, I think, one scene, is it?
Yeah.
Right.
And then again, so you go, after he came out of that, was he disappointed to find out however much work he put into it? Or was he kind of like, hey, if I get my one scene with Malick, that's fine.
Yeah.
That seems like most people were probably content with that.
I think I read Adrian Brody was a little disappointed that his part got cut down. It sounds like he had a much bigger role in it. And then, you hear stories like Sean Penn, I think, not so much this film, but more Tree of Life that he was like, what happened to like the whole thing that I did? Like the entire part was just like a few.
Maybe it was just his turn at that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And then like Bill Pullman, Mickey Rourke, there were a number of other actors who were in this film and completely were eliminated
erased from history.
Yeah, Billy Bob Thornton did a ton of voiceover for it, and all of that was gone. But I think that speaks again to what Malick is trying to capture here, because unlike other filmmakers who's like, this is the story, this is the plot, we're going to capture this and put it on film and craft a really excellent film. And there are plenty of amazing films that are made that way. But I think with Malick, there is something that he's trying to reach for. And I think it's less about, I mean, there definitely is a story here. We're watching the story of them trying to take this hill in Guadalcanal and the whole thing with property and everything. But to a certain extent, it's less about that and more about like what it does to these people as they're going through this process.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way to look at it, Andy. It's like you hear when you talk to sculptors who are like, oh, I see the marble and then the shape emerges from it. Whatever. I don't know how that works. That's not how my mind works. But that's kind of how I think Malick sees film. Like he's still shaping the entirety of the story all the way to the final edit, right? Like he's okay making those cuts because it's all right. He had the whole block of marble, and that block of marble included Mickey Rourke and Billy Bob Thornton and all of that. The thing that interests me so much is like he's such a hands-on director, and the act of taking what you shoot and then crafting the final story out of it, that's such an interesting gift in this industry. You have like Soderbergh, you have like these people who are holding the camera and then taking it and directing and taking that material and going and doing this other thing. I'm curious your perspective, Ross, on like you seem to have such a natural ability to shoot a thing and then walk away. I think before we started, you were talking about that you haven't actually seen the third episode of The After Party in black and white, which is a nod on film noir. How do you live with yourself, man? Like I'm so attached to the creative output. Like how do you let go and let somebody else take this stuff that you created?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is trusting all the people you're working with, which sometimes it takes projects to build up. But I was actually able to spend more time in color on After Party than I have on many, if not all, of my other TV projects. Which was great. Dave Hussey, the colorist at Company 3, was, sometimes they're understandably like, hey, let's do a first pass together and then let me do the whole thing. And then you come in just.
Yeah.
But he was like, more time I can have you, the better. There's so much. He did season 1 with Carl Hurst, another DP, very talented DP. And he was like, we learned a lot of stuff in season 1. And he said one thing that was crucial was the more time I had with the DP, the better I can sort out what's going on where. And it'll just make things much more efficient. So I got to spend a lot of time with him. Oddly enough, I don't know if this is going to make me sound bad, but up until a few years ago, I even shooting on set, I wouldn't really wear contacts and listen to audio that much unless it was a critical timing thing, because I just wanted to focus so much on what it looked like. I have since changed my tune on that, but in a weird way, I think it helps me be more comfortable when I go through color, because we're rarely ever listening with sound, so you watch through a scene or watch through a few cuts when you're adjusting color, and that's it. And so I see it piecemeal, but I never see the whole thing. And there's something really nice about, holding myself off. So when it comes out, or when I go to the first screening, that's when you see all the components come together. You hear the score underneath it and you see everything. And you're like, wow, if I liked how it looked without any of those other elements, then it can only get that much better. But
at least it's not, hey, was I even involved in this project?
Yeah, exactly.
To that end, can you real quick, just for our listeners, describe a little bit about the color process and because this is after you've shot the film, you're coming in and it involves your role a little bit in the kind of the post-production process.
Yeah. And of course it varies, but you generally will have a what's called a LUT, a lookup table that is kind of like like I describe it as a digital film stock. It's a digital filter, if you will, that you've loaded into the camera to interpret what it's seeing, to push it in a certain direction. And then through that filter, you will then, on top of it, you're using different lenses, you're using different filters, but you'll also use what's a CDL, which I think stands for color decision list. but it's an additional layer of color settings, tweaks that you're doing to it, and then that gets sent down to post, and then they'll do a rough edit with all that, so it looks somewhat like you want it to look later, and then once the cut gets locked, typically you'll go in and sit with the colorist and do final color pass and really refine it.
It's an industry that has really kind of grown, the whole coloring side of things, really kind of since, I don't know, my brain always pins 2000 when it was the Coen brothers did Oh Brother Where Art Thou, that really kind of turned that whole thing. So Malick and John Toll probably were still doing some work on the color in post, but it was nowhere near the level that it's grown into these days.
Yeah, big time. And I know even on, they were shooting film and they were still in the world of choosing your print stock, that, not only your shooting stocks, but then, when we print out, here's different options to what we print to and how it's going to affect the look of the film, and they're still doing color grades on top of that. But there's much more chemical analog stuff going on in that than, and I don't know how deep into effects they get. I feel like a lot of, like when you see an airplane flying overhead, almost always now it's like, well, why we'll just do that, and that's just 3D in post. And I feel like in Thin Red Line, it's like it's all practical.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely become. I mean, the DI. I think people still call it a DI, digital intermediate, but I think that came from the film days where it was like, okay, we're going to scan this all, we're going to do some digital work on it, and then put it back out to film.
Put it back.
Now it's just, you can call it a DI, but it is digital because you're shooting digital, and now it's just, every time I go into the bay, it's like, oh, the new release of Resolve or whatever software, Luster or whatever they're using. Now it automatically tracks every face in the frame, and it'll recognize which character it is. And if you're like, number 3 on the call sheet always has we're always going to add a little bit of diffusion to the highlights. It'll, like, when it ingests the footage, it'll already give you the base of what you're doing. So it's wild. It's like we're talking about with AI, having access to this great technology sometimes can be your detriment. Sometimes you don't need to add all that stuff, but if you're doing it by default because you can, it can really skew things. So it's interesting how it keeps changing.
That's amazing. And I don't know, with this type of storytelling that Malick does that we see here, I mean, obviously he still is, now cranking films out, for Malick, fairly regular basis. But it does make me wonder, like, how much of this stuff is he incorporating into the productions that he's doing?
Yeah, I'd be curious watching some of his newer stuff, what he's doing.
Yeah. Performances? Any performances stand out as your favorites in this film?
I like Sean Penn. I think he's amazing. I think what's his name? I've got it written down here somewhere. That Elias Koteas.
Elias Koteas.
I think he was fantastic. I kept looking him up early on when I saw it. I remember the first time, and I was like, "Who is this?" I haven't seen him in anything, but I thought he was fantastic. He's been in a bunch of stuff, and but he just, I guess it's easy to get distracted by John C. Reilly. I'm a huge fan of him. It's just funny to see him in there as like earlier in his career, but yeah, I think Penn really stands out to me. I thought Adrian Brody was fantastic too, even the little we get to see him, but I've always liked his work. He's so expressive, and see them all a little bit younger. Is fun.
So many baby faces in this, and they just kept popping up. I'm like, there's another. It's like this. I mean,
Jared Leto.
Yeah, Leto.
Come on.
It really was. As you said, like everybody was like, a new Malick film. Sure, sign me up.
Yeah,
like everybody was in this. It's amazing. And then you read the list of people who got cut from it. It's like, yeah, and pretty much everyone was in this one.
Yeah. Well, I know at some point Brad Pitt and Johnny Depp, I think, met with him. I don't know if scheduling or whatever it was, but I mean, it gives sense to the time, like how big of a deal it was when people heard that he was going to do this film. I think people were like, well, hold on. I know I've got other projects going on, but maybe I should do this Malick thing.
Yeah, right. Did you see this in the theater when it came out?
I did not, regrettably. But
because you were a little behind on your Malick.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was in 98. What was I watching? I mean, I guess that was close to, I was getting into like American Beauty came out, in 99?
Yeah.
Gladiator, like a lot of those movies then where I was starting to get into stuff beyond just the dumb comedies and stuff. And also no hate for dumb comedies. I still am a big fan. In fact, one of my top 3 choices to talk about with you guys would have been Best in Show. Christopher Guest fan too.
That is so good. Such a great film.
Yeah.
I don't think we've talked about any guest on this thing. So you ever want to come back?
Next time. Yeah. Next time.
The field's wide open.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's one of the things that about Malick that I've always responded to and respect is that it's almost like he's a documentary filmmaker, and somehow he's able to work the way a documentary filmmaker would work but with a script and with the structure of a studio movie, which I think is fascinating. Having the instincts to shoot in a documentary style or to approach what's happening around you in a documentary style, I think it's a specific trait that not everybody has. So I've always enjoyed that in his work too.
It's so interesting that this, as you mentioned earlier, came out the same year as Saving Private Ryan. Two very different filmmakers delivering two very different looks at war, but both exceptional films. Like they both ended up making incredible films the same year that came out. And it does make me wonder. I know this was a year of the whole, the Weinstein machine was really in full gear, kind of as far as what they were doing with the awards and everything. But it does make me wonder if there was some people voting for one vote or others voting for the other that ended up not getting either of these kind of into the place to win Best Picture that year.
Yeah. I mean, you think about like if I was to list in terms of great war movies, I feel like they've always been at least a couple years between, like a really fantastic war movie. And to think about, I wish, if I had been a little bit older and a little bit more aware in 98, I'd be so curious what the vibe was between. It would be different. I mean, nowadays you would definitely see some sort of like, let's pit these two against each other to benefit both of them. But like, it's always about, well, which one are you on, but I think you can, it's like a lot of things. They can both exist. They can both be great. They can both tell a story with a similar topic and be great in different ways.
Not at award season, Ross. I'm sorry. Yeah, not at
exactly.
awards.
So, what are some other war films? I mean, you just mentioned kind of this idea of these great war films periodically, but do you have some others that stand out for you?
I mean, Platoon is a great one. Apocalypse Now. I'm a big fan of Jarhead. I love Deacon, so I've got to put Jarhead in there. I mean, Hurt Locker was great. I only saw it once, but I remember loving that. But it's hard for me to. It doesn't stick out to me the way Apocalypse Now does. Like I've seen 100 times. So I think Platoon is up there. Like we're talking about the kind of dehumanization that it takes for a soldier to deal with what war is. I would imagine, again, it's like we're all talking about this. I have no personal experience with it, so it's hard to feel like I'm talking out of place to a certain degree. But I think one thing that's so really strong about Platoon is the way early on they see just like kind of the changing of these, like pulling out the kind of soft side of humanity to prepare these kids to go into battle, which is kind of, it gives you the shivers. Who shot Platoon? I'm trying to remember who.
Oh dear.
I can't remember if it was a Stone regular. Let me look real quick. Oliver Stone Platoon. The DP was Robert Richardson.
Oh, okay. Well, I figured it was one of the greats.
Yeah, yeah. He did Salvador, This, Wall Street, Born on the 4th of July, The Doors, JFK, Heaven and Earth, Nixon, U-Turn, and it looks like that was that was the last time he worked with him. So, but that was a good run of working with Stone.
Yeah. Well, and then he went to Tarantino, which is not a bad movie either.
Yeah, not a bad movie.
Right. No kidding.
But after Platoon was Full Metal Jacket. You got to leave.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Which is another big one. So it's one of those subjects. I feel like, every few years, if we could get another great perspective on World War II, it seems like there are constantly new viewpoints to look at it through, which is great.
When you look at the cinematography that like John Toll did in this particular film, I mean, I don't know if you're a John Toll fan. Obviously, he's been a cinematographer who's been around for quite a while as well. But I mean, does this stand out as like, oh, this is a John Toll film? I can tell by the look, or is it more? Does Malick's kind of tone come through more? How do you see the cinematography for this?
For me, Malick's tone comes through. I feel like I mean, Chivo's done a lot of his more recent stuff, but I feel like you could be the heaviest handed cinematographer, and I feel like Malick's films are going to look like Malick's films. So, and I'm a fan of Toll for sure, but I don't. It's hard for me to ascribe a signature to him versus that. I mean, like you said, the New World was his next movie, and I think that was the first one that Lebesky shot with him, right?
Yeah, it wasn't. This was the only one that Toll shot with him.
Yeah, and so part of me goes, probably like most DPs would be, is like, did something happen where they didn't want to work together again, or right. And more often than not, especially at this level, people are just like, well, I have 3 movies the next 3 years, like I'm not available next year, or whatever it is, but so it could have been as simple as that, but the New World has a lot of the same beautiful elements, and I don't know, it'd be interesting to do a side by side and try to find, is there a certain tendency that like maybe Lebesky brought to New World when they were in nature versus what Toll was doing in nature there. But I also think that a huge element of helping Malick get his vision is to have this like massive level of flexibility and the ability to problem solve on your toes. Because I think there's this slight misconception that Malick only will shoot at sunrise and sunset. And like from what I've read, Thin Red Line was like, we're shooting sun up to sundown, but we're shooting everything in between too. And you got to figure out how to deal with that. And so to have that, like we were talking about before, a certain level of patience, but also this kind of like a good example, documentary and real people director I've worked with a number of times. I did a documentary with in some commercials, great with real people. His name is Greg Coase. And he always said to me, he said his mantra is don't react, respond. So when something happens, and even if it's in the scripted world, but I think it's particularly appropriate in filmmaking, is there's always stuff that goes not according to plan or not what you want to do. But instead of spending the time complaining or being bummed out, or, it's let's focus on how are we going to fix the problem or how are we going to adjust. Oftentimes it turns into a better result. But by responding, you can save your bitching for later, So
Yeah.
So I think that I would imagine that that's part of the job description when it comes to working with Malick, where there is definitely this like, okay, look, we're going to look over here now. Now, what's the best way we can approach this problem? And I think that's a huge part of being a successful cinematographer in general.
Well, I suppose, we were again just going back to the hawk that they wanted to catch, like having your eyes open, not just being so focused on, well, we got to get this, and this, but always having your eyes open to say, oh, look at that. What do you think of that? Look at the way that the light's hitting the trees right now,
right?
And just kind of keeping that perspective. I imagine it is probably a little different for some people in the industry to kind of make that full shift when they're working with somebody like Malick.
Yeah. Well, and then also you have to kind of include it's all the other departments then, it's the ADs, like suddenly a camera starts rolling, it's a script supervisor. You kind of need to get a gauge of where everybody's at, or at least communicate to them that manage their expectations that this is a way we want to be able to work. And I'd be curious, on Malick's sets, does he do it at any given point, or is it a very kind of like, oh, we're seeing this, okay, everybody, let's quiet, let's roll camera? Is it a process thing, or is it more of a loose? There's a lot of, like, when I work with Jordan that I did Kings of Summer with, and we just did this pilot together. A lot of people use the term 50-50, where you could be on set with actors and you see something cool happening. Somebody's off in the corner, like thinking to themselves, you're like, oh, that's just a cool moment. It has nothing to do with the script or whatever. And you want an operator to shoot it while they're doing makeup on somebody else. You yell out 50-50. In our case, for whatever reason, we developed the word bratwurst was our, like, bratwurst. So if you say
cinematographer safe word.
and so, yeah, exactly. And so that was a thing. And if there'd be people like sound people, if they don't know, it's great if they can kind of sneak over and pick up some stuff too.
Yeah, right.
But it's like you want to have a synergy so people support that, because it can also go the other way where you just shoot it, even if the director's like, I'll point the camera, I'll operate it. If wardrobe is like, well, what is this costume appropriate for which shoot day is this? What? And people can get bent out of shape if they're not part of the conversation, and reasonably so. So you want to be able to alleviate people's concerns. It's like, we're not going to get upset with you for not doing your job. This is going to be a piece that we don't know what part of the puzzle it is, and I think that's a very Malickian thing to be like, I'm not sure where I'm going to put it, but it's beautiful, and I'm going to shoot it, and that's it.
I imagine that his this would actually be something interesting to look at. The assistant direction team that he has, like, has that been consistent? Like, has
do
he
they
found a
follow him
team?
around?
Because that's the team that really does have to manage, like, keep all these different departments informed as to what they're doing, how they're structuring all this. I imagine that that's a lot of work for that team to constantly be shifting.
That's a good point. I'd be curious to know if he has one team that he kind of. You would think if he does one project and it works well and they know him, he doesn't want to have to start over.
Right. Yeah.
And I would think too, there is something that when you have a great AD team that understands the director can just focus on the one thing that they need to focus on. And you have they're kind of walking in a bubble ahead of them, communicating to everybody and taking care of everything so everybody already understands. And it makes a major difference. So yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. Interesting.
Great.
How to do it award season, Andrew?
This was a popular one. 22 wins, 47 other nominations. I mean, in consideration with something like Saving Private Ryan, it might be a little different. But still, for Malick, it was definitely something that got some recognition. Over at the Oscars, it did get nominated for 7 awards. Best Cinematography, it lost to Saving Private Ryan. Same thing, Best Director lost to Saving Private Ryan. Best Film Editing lost to Saving Private Ryan. And Best Sound lost to Saving Private Ryan. It was nominated for Best Music, Original Dramatic Score for Hans Zimmer's wonderful music, but lost to Life is Beautiful. Also wonderful music, but I would probably pick this over Life is Beautiful.
Yeah, I would too.
Best Adapted Screenplay was nominated, but lost to Gods and Monsters. And last but not least, the big Weinstein win, Best Picture. It was nominated, but lost to Shakespeare in Love.
Where do you stand on that, though? Where do you stand on that Shakespeare in Love?
I love Shakespeare in Love, but this was definitely the year that felt like those Weinsteins were doing something to fix the ballot box a little bit, because it definitely seemed like Shakespeare in Love was kind of a fan favorite, but likely wasn't going to be the winner. And then to see it win again, was it because there was like a splitting of the votes between the Saving Private Ryan people versus the Thin Red Line people? Totally. I don't know, but still, it was a bit of a surprise. And then over at the American Society of Cinematographer Awards, I just thought this was worth noting that John Toll did win Outstanding Achievement in Cinematography in a theatrical release.
It's like those people knew how to vote.
Well, Saving Private Ryan does look good.
Yeah, it really does. That's true. How to do at the box office.
Malick had a strong budget of $52 million, or $95.7 million in today's dollars. The movie was released for awards consideration with a limited release on 5 screens, starting December 23rd, 1998, opposite Patch Adams, Stepmom, Mighty Joe Young, and The Faculty. It went wide on January 15th, where it jumped to number 4 at the box office for 2 weeks, and then went on to earn $36.4 million domestically and $61.7 million internationally, for a total gross of $180.5 million in today's dollars. All told, it was a moderate box office success that was certainly buoyed by its awards buzz. Well, Ross, this has been a fantastic conversation about a fantastic movie. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us about it.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been fun.
Any last thoughts about the movie or anything else that you think people should pay attention to when they check this one out?
No, I mean, all I would say is if anybody hasn't seen Badlands, Days of Heaven, and Thin Red Line, if you just watch those 3, that's your taste of Malick, and then we'll all together experience what happened after Tree of Life, because I haven't seen anything after that. And
That's right.
Oh, what an incredible shared experience you've offered us, Ross. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will say on the Blu-ray, I liked the little note when I hit play that a message pops up and says, just be aware that the director recommends that you turn your volume way up for this movie.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, don't see that too often.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you have any place out there that you want people to check out to learn more about you? I know you have your website and stuff. Are you active on the socials or anything?
Not super active on Instagram. I'm on it, but so you can see some older stuff. Maybe I'll start posting again. It's just Ross Riege is my Instagram handle. Otherwise, there's IMDb, and then that's about all I got. Got a website, rossriege.com, but it's probably a little bit outdated.
Well, people can go there and check out what it is that you've been up to and everything. And well, we certainly appreciate you joining us again. Thank you for being here to have this conversation with us today, Ross.
Yeah, it was awesome chatting with you guys. Thank you.
I gotta say one more thing. We didn't say we dropped the name once. Weird, the Al Yankovic story is awesome. Go watch that movie because Ross did that too.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a wild ride. It's very fun.
It's wild ride, and it's getting like it now that it's kind of out of the sort of Roku box. Like more people are seeing it, and it's so great that it's getting attention. And of course, After Party on Apple TV Plus, fantastic, so much fun.
Yes,
yeah,
please do.
Now I'll shut up.
No, it's all stuff worth checking out. Absolutely, check all that stuff out, everybody. And that's it. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. For all of you out there, we hope that you like the show, and certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like. The Next Reel Presents Movies We Like is part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. The music is Chunk Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. And remember, if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time.
Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way.
I love having these wonderful chats on Movies We Like with all these industry guests talking about some of their favorite movies.
So many great conversations on that show about so many great movies.
We have so much fun having these conversations, but producing the show week after week does require a lot of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these incredible conversations.
The Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals links to the source material for all the adapted film discussions on the Next Reel's family of podcasts. Purchasing through our links supports the show.
It's your one-stop shop for Amazon and Apple links where you can buy your copy of the original source material.
Original material for movies like Casino Royale,
The Silent Partner,
Never Let Me Go,
Silver Linings Playbook,
There Will Be Blood, based on Upton Sinclair's Oil.
I believe it's Oil!
Oh yeah, I forgot the exclamation point.
Plus, by using those links to buy your next read, Apple and Amazon show us a little bit of love, which allows you to support our family of shows with minimal effort.
thenextreel.com/originals. It's a great way to support the show and find your next page turner.
That's right. Head over to thenextreel.com/originals to pick out your next read and dig in today.